All right, so we're diving deep today into the world of psilocybin. And specifically, we're looking at its potential for treating anxiety and depression. You guys send in some really interesting stuff for this one.
We've got a little bit of everything. Documentaries, TED Talks,
Yeah.
personal stories. We've even got some hardcore science to dig into.
It's going to be a wild ride. We've got this documentary about psilocybin being used to help cancer patients cope with end-of-life anxiety. And then there's this TED Talk about the whole microdosing trend. Plus, we've even got a personal story from someone who used psilocybin to deal with their anxiety and depression.
And just to keep things balanced, we've got some insights from a psychiatrist who's a little more grounded. Plus, we'll get into some serious scientific analysis of all the research that's been done on microdosing LSD. We're going to try to cover all the bases.
We are. Let's start with that documentary. I don't know about you, but I found it incredibly moving. Just seeing those patients facing terminal illness, the fear, the desperation, it just really got to me.
It's a powerful reminder that anxiety and depression can really affect anyone at any stage of life. And for these patients, the stakes are so high, they're literally grappling with their mortality.
Exactly. And you know what I found interesting? They didn't just hand psilocybin out like it was a quick fix. There was a whole process, preparation, guidance from therapists, and they even had sessions afterwards to help people process the experience. It was clear that this wasn't just about having a psychedelic trip. It was about using psilocybin as a tool for healing, for personal growth.
Yeah, that context is really important. You know, these experiences can be really intense, really profound. Having support is crucial.
Absolutely. And speaking of profound, some of the things these patients described experiencing during their psilocybin sessions were just mind-blowing. One patient was talking about seeing these intricate patterns, feeling a sense of unity with the universe, like everything was connected. Another one talked about confronting their deepest fears and coming out the other side with this sense of peace they'd never felt before.
It's almost like psilocybin allows them to tap into a different level of consciousness, one that's less focused on the individual self, more on the connection to something larger. It seems like that shift in perspective really has a profound impact on their relationship with death.
Yeah, it's no longer this terrifying, looming threat. Death becomes a natural part of life, something they can accept, even embrace.
And that change in mindset, it seems to have ripple effects.
Yeah.
They go way beyond just their fear of death. A lot of patients in the documentary talked about reconnecting with their loved ones, finding new meaning in their lives, approaching the time they have left with gratitude and peace.
It's incredible. Really makes you wonder if we've had it all wrong about these substances. Okay, so let's shift gears a little. Let's talk about the microdosing phenomenon. What were your impressions of the TED Talk on that?
Well, I thought it was really interesting how the researcher talked about the demographics of people who microdose. You know, they're often older, more urban, and they're usually driven by a desire for self-improvement. Not exactly the type of folks you usually picture experimenting with psychedelics.
Right. It's not like a bunch of college kids trying to get high. These are people using microdosing to enhance their well-being, sharpen their focus, just feel a little better in their daily lives. And the substances they're using, mostly LSD and psilocybin mushrooms.
It's almost as if they're treating it like a cognitive enhancer, kind of like how some people use nootropics. The science on microdosing is still pretty fuzzy, and the research that's been done so far, well, it has its limits.
It does, and we'll definitely get into those limitations. But first, let's talk about the benefits, the ones that people who microdose are reporting. They're saying things like reduced anxiety, less depression, less stress, improved mood, better cognitive function. Some even say it helps them be more creative and better at solving problems. Oh, and get this. The researcher actually found that these benefits were even stronger in older participants.
Now that's an interesting finding. It does make you wonder, is there something different about the aging brain that makes it more receptive to microdosing? Or could it be that older folks are just more aware of subtle changes in their mental and emotional states?
Good question. And then you've got this whole practice of stacking, where people combine microdoses of psychedelics with other things, like lion's mane mushrooms and cacao. They say it boosts the benefits, but again, there's not much scientific evidence to back that up. What do you think about that?
Well, it just shows that people are always looking for new ways to feel better, to optimize their well-being. But it's important to keep in mind that these substances, even in tiny doses, can affect our bodies. We need more research to understand what might happen, especially long-term.
Definitely. We shouldn't get too carried away with the hype. It's important to hear a more grounded perspective, too. And that's where the psychiatrist comes in.
Yeah, he offered a good counterpoint. To all the excitement around microdosing, he emphasized the importance of understanding how our bodies process drugs, how even small doses can have an effect.
And he made a really good point about the difficulty of measuring microdoses precisely, especially for medications that come in pill form. It's not as simple as just cutting a pill into tiny pieces.
It's not. And there's always a chance of side effects, even with tiny doses. So his perspective is a good reminder to be cautious, to be thoughtful about microdosing, not just jump on the bandwagon because it's trendy.
For sure. So we've got this mix of personal stories and limited research, and it can be tough to know what to believe. That's why I found that scientific presentation on microdosing LSD so helpful. It cleared up some things.
What stood out to you?
Well, they talked about the difficulties of studying microdosing in a scientific way. It's hard to measure subtle effects. And then there's the placebo effect. People might feel better just because they think they're taking something that will help them.
You're right. Separating the real effects from the power of expectation is tough.
Yeah. And even though there are a lot of people sharing their positive experiences, the researchers emphasize that the scientific research is still in its early stages.
They did bring up some promising findings from animal studies. Some research suggests that microdosing LSD could have a positive effect on things like depression, anxiety, and social behavior in rodents. But we can't just assume those results apply to humans.
Right. And the human studies they talked about, they had mixed results. Some showed positive effects, but they often chalked it up to the placebo effect. So the bottom line is, we need more research to figure out the right doses, how long to microdose for, and who it might actually benefit.
That's a good point. And that brings us to the most personal part of all of this, the story from someone who actually used psilocybin to address their own struggles with anxiety and depression. Their story offers a glimpse into what's possible, but we do have to remember that it's just one person's experience.
Absolutely. Let's get into it. This person had been dealing with anxiety and depression for most of their life. They'd tried everything: therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, but nothing seemed to really work. They were constantly overwhelmed, trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts and fear.
That sounds familiar. A lot of people who suffer from these conditions, they feel stuck, like they've tried everything and nothing helps.
Exactly. And then they discovered psilocybin. They started with small doses, and then something really unexpected happened. They felt this wave of peace wash over them, and they couldn't stop yawning. Not exactly what you'd expect from a psychedelic, right?
It's an interesting detail. Maybe it's like a physical and mental relaxation response, a letting go of tension.
Maybe. But things got even more interesting when they decided to try a much larger dose, what's often called a heroic dose, and that's when the real transformation began.
A heroic dose.
Yeah.
That definitely sounds intense. What happened?
Well, they did have some intense physical stuff, nausea, chills, but they also described these incredible visual hallucinations, like colors swirling and patterns changing, and they talked about this huge release of emotion, like years of sadness and fear just pouring out.
It sounds like a classic psychedelic experience. But in this case, it becomes a way to deal with deep-seated emotional pain.
Exactly, and what's amazing is that out of that experience came a whole new understanding of themselves and their place in the world. They described feeling a sense of connection with everything around them, as if the illusion of separation had just disappeared. And with that came this feeling of peace, and their anxiety and depression started to lessen.
That's similar to what we saw in the documentary, that idea of transcending the individual self and feeling connected to something bigger. It seems to be a common theme with psilocybin, whether it's in a clinical setting or a personal one.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've seen how psilocybin is being used to help terminally ill patients find peace. We've talked about the growing trend of microdosing, and we've heard this incredible personal story of transformation. But there's so much more to unpack.
You know, it's amazing when you really start looking into the research on psilocybin, just how many different conditions they're exploring it for. I mean, we've been talking a lot about anxiety and depression, but it really seems to go way beyond that.
It does. It's like this whole new frontier of treatment. There's so much research happening on psilocybin for things like PTSD addiction, even OCD. It feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, definitely. There's this one study I read that was really interesting and got something called breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA.
Yeah.
You know, for treatment-resistant depression. That's a pretty big deal.
That's huge. So it sounds like the medical community is starting to take psilocybin seriously, but What about microdosing? Is there any actual science to back up all the claims people are making?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. You see, in those clinical trials, they're using very specific doses of psilocybin, often in a controlled setting with therapists and everything. But microdosing is kind of like the Wild West. People are experimenting with different stuff, different amounts,
Yeah.
and there's really no standard.
Right. And like we talked about earlier, the research on microdosing is still pretty limited. There just haven't been enough large-scale studies to really figure out the benefits and the risks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even when people say they're feeling better after microdosing, we have to remember that just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. You know what I mean? There could be all sorts of other factors involved, like the placebo effect, or just changes in their lifestyle or behavior.
That makes sense. And it's important to hear people's stories, but we can't just assume that everyone will have the same experience.
Definitely. Everyone reacts to these substances differently.
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
So what's the takeaway here? What should people keep in mind?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge the potential psilocybin has. It really could be a powerful tool for helping people. But we need a lot more research to really understand how it works and make sure it's used safely.
I agree. And in the meantime, people should be really careful. Don't believe everything you read or hear, and always think about where the information is coming from.
And if you're thinking about trying psilocybin, please talk to a doctor or a therapist first, someone who understands these substances and can help you make the right decision.
That's really important. And do your research. There are some great books and websites out there that can give you a much better understanding of psilocybin and how it could be used.
The main thing is to be curious. Be open to learning. We're really at the beginning of a whole new way of thinking about mental health. It's a pretty exciting time.
It really is. So as we go deeper into this, let's talk about something that's been on my mind this whole time. It's the connection between science and spirituality.
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting one. For centuries, people all over the world have used psychedelics for spiritual exploration and healing, and now science is starting to catch up and give us some clues about how it all works.
It's like modern science is finally catching up to ancient wisdom. Some researchers think that psilocybin might work by quieting down certain parts of the brain, like the default mode network. And when that happens, people often describe feeling a sense of ego dissolution, like a feeling of oneness or interconnectedness.
Right. And those experiences can be incredibly powerful. They can change how people see themselves, how they see the world. They can even lead to insights about the meaning of life.
It's like psilocybin gives you a glimpse of another reality, one that's beyond what we normally perceive.
That's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It's not just about treating illness. It's about exploring the full potential of our minds and understanding where we fit in the universe.
And it raises some big questions. If these substances can change our consciousness so much, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? What does it mean to be human? What are the ethics of using something that can alter our perception?
These are questions that philosophers and spiritual seekers have been wrestling with for ages. And now science is starting to grapple with them too. It's really a convergence of different ways of understanding the world.
Okay, let's bring it back down to earth for a second. Even if we put aside the mystical stuff, there's no denying that psilocybin could offer real relief to people struggling with things like anxiety, depression, and PTSD.
Absolutely. And if it can help people find meaning and purpose in their lives, even when things are really tough, that's something worth exploring.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. What part of this whole psilocybin thing really stood out to you? Was it the idea of easing suffering, the possibility of expanding consciousness, or maybe the ethical and legal challenges we're facing as these substances become more mainstream? Hopefully this deep dive got you thinking and sparked some curiosity for you to keep learning.
And we have to remember, this is just the start. There's still so much to learn. As research continues and we understand more about psilocybin, who knows what we'll discover?
You're right. This is an ongoing story, and we're only just beginning to write the next chapter. Now, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to get into some of the very latest research on psilocybin. We'll explore how we can bring these substances into mainstream medicine. And we'll leave you with some things to ponder about the future of psychedelic therapy.
Stick with us.
Wow, we've really gone deep, haven't we? From those incredible stories of healing to the hard science, it's been quite a journey. But there's one more thing I want to make sure we talk about before we wrap up.
I think I know what you're getting at. How do we actually make this happen? How do we bring psilocybin into mainstream medicine?
Exactly. It's easy to get excited about the potential, but turning that potential into real-world solutions, well, that's a whole other challenge. It's not like we can just start writing psilocybin prescriptions, right?
Oh, absolutely not. There's so many things to figure out, like What's the best way to even give people psilocybin? And how much should they take for different conditions? Those are big questions.
And what about the setting? In that documentary, they emphasize how important it was for the cancer patients to have that therapeutic support. Do we need special clinics? Trained facilitators? It makes you wonder if our current medical system is even ready for this.
It's a whole different approach, isn't it? It's not just about managing symptoms. It's about inner healing, transformation.
Exactly. And then there's the legal stuff. Psilocybin is still illegal in a lot of places. Changing those laws, it's a long, complicated process. It's kind of like you need the research to change the laws, but you need the laws to be changed to do the research.
It is. It's a bit of a catch-22. But there is some good news. There's a growing movement to bring psilocybin and other psychedelics into mainstream medicine. More research is happening. There's more investment. We're even seeing some policy changes. It's slow, but it's happening.
That's good to hear. It does feel like we're on the brink of a big change in how we think about mental health. But even if psilocybin becomes widely accepted, we have to remember it's not a magic cure.
Oh, for sure. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used in different ways.
Right. It's about using it responsibly and understanding its power.
Absolutely. And remembering that everyone's journey is different. What works for one person might not work for another.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What we've been talking about today, it goes way beyond just the science of psilocybin. This is about consciousness, about the meaning of life, our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It's a journey, and it takes courage and an open mind. It's about questioning everything we think we know about the world and about ourselves.
And it's only the beginning. Who knows what we'll discover as we keep exploring? I hope this deep dive has sparked something in you, a curiosity to keep learning.
I hope so too. It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.